Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mallory Bauer. I'm the first year experience coordinator, and I'm being joined today by Amy Bidwell and Lynn Blanchfield. They're going to help me present today on some first year initiatives. Like John said, this is a really good time to have this conversation after Debbie Furlong's presentation about some data, which included some first year results from some surveys. I'll be sharing some first year data that we captured as well. It's very raw data since we just got the numbers at the end of last semester, but I'm hoping to share some of that with you. This should be pretty informal. I know we have some of our first year folks in this room today who either advise first year students, teach first year students, just work with first year students in general. So we will be kind of culminating our findings from the semester with a discussion about challenges and triumphs and directions we want to go in the future. So if you have strategies that worked for you this semester that you'd like to share, kind of keep those in the back of your minds, because we'd love to hear from you when we very briefly do an overview of some things we implemented this semester. Lynn and Amy, do you have anything you want to add before we start?
Nope.
Okay. So I have some slides that I'm going to share just to keep me on track. Since I'm a little out of practice with presenting. Can everybody see my slides there? Okay. So a few things we're going to be talking about today that we implemented in the fall are a GST 100 expansion pilot. So we did offer a 1 credit first year seminar type course to about half of our incoming first year students this past semester. So that was new for incoming students. So we'll talk about the triumphs and challenges of that pilot program. We did a first choice refresh of our goals. So Lynn will be able to talk a little bit about teaching. Well, Lynn, Amy, and I all teach first choice classes. So we'll be able to share a little bit about what we found helpful and what was very difficult for our incoming students. And then we'll have a discussion about coaching. We implemented a first year success coaching program, and Amy used some wellness coaches in her first year signature courses, which seem to work very well over the past semester. So we'll give you some details on that and how we plan on building on that in the future. And then we'll end with some data and discussion about things that you found helpful or things you would like to see based on your experiences. So here we go. So the GST expansion pilot I had been working on last winter and into the spring, and then COVID hit. So it kind of added some extra layers to things, which I know you're all familiar with. We all had to, I know you're sick of the word, but pivot in a lot of ways. It seems like every day, every week, we were kind of zigzagging through spring and fall semesters. But the idea was to offer a first year seminar, a 1 credit seminar, to a large chunk of our first year students in the fall. It started with a handful of sections, and because of the pandemic, we decided to grow this pilot to serve about half of our incoming student population. So about 500 students ended up registering for a GST 100 section. And GST 100 is college orientation and success. So it covers basically intro to college kind of stuff, academic skills, how to make friends, what are the key resources on campus, how do you handle challenges when they come up, and really just a seminar-based discussion class with a staff or faculty person where they know they have someone they can go to for help besides their academic advisor. So that consistent interaction over time. So when we started planning for the pilot, the intention was to have these seminars face to face, like in our before COVID world, right? So as we were pre-registering our first year students for classes, and for those of you who don't know, our academic advisors actually create the schedules for all of our incoming students. So we made a decision, an executive decision, to do all of these GST sections online synchronously to make sure they were accessible by students depending on how they decided to join us in the fall. Students were deciding up until the last minute if they wanted to stay home and take classes online or if they wanted to join us physically on campus for the semester. So we decided to just do across the board synchronous online sections of GST 100, which of course had its challenges and its pluses along the way. So things that the GST pilot really focused on was resilience and empowerment. And I would say that this is one of the first year goals that we focused on the most. We talked a lot about COVID. We talked a lot about the challenges that COVID brought. It seems like every week our discussion was very focused on that and how they could overcome some of those challenges. It was a space where students got to vent. They got to talk about how stressful it was that they had to be caregivers for people in their families and also juggle their studies. They got to talk about issues with access to technology and trying to keep up in their online courses. Their fears and anxiety when it came to being sick or being moved from quarantine to isolation and back to their residence hall rooms. And they're in a suite. They were supposed to have 6 roommates and they ended up in a suite by themselves and they feel isolated. So it ended up being really nice because it was a chance for them to come together with other first year students every week with a success coach, which is a kind of like a peer advisor, and then also a faculty staff instructor, kind of a team of support for those first year students, and really just giving them the space to talk about what's going on, along with some guided coping skills and resources along the way. So resilience and empowerment was a lot of what we talked about in the semester. I would say this kind of took precedent over a lot of other things. If you think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a lot of it was just staying at the bottom of that pyramid, talking about, are my basic needs being fulfilled? And if they're not, how can we get that so we can help you be successful with your academics? We talked a lot about social and personal responsibility, why it's important for you to wear your masks. What are the consequences of you going to parties? We of course had students who were going to parties and were very open about talking about these things in classes. So we were able to have those discussions about protecting each other and some of the science behind what we were asking them to do. We're not trying to ruin your lives, but we're trying to keep you all safe. So we did have quite a few discussions about that in those classes. And of course, inclusion, diversity, and equity. If you remember, I'm sure this year, 2020 feels like it was 800 years long, but over the summer, there were protests around racial unrest and injustices, and that was weighing heavily on some of our incoming students' minds. So it was important to us as the first year experience team to work with our diversity, equity, inclusion staff on campus to really build in some modules to that course around nonviolent communication, around inclusion, and being receptive to different viewpoints and being able to communicate your own viewpoint and listen to another side without being violent or disruptive in the classroom. So we spent a lot of time talking about identity and how that shows up, and built some of those modules into our GST 100 pilot. I will say this pilot had a lot of triumphs in terms of giving students the space to talk through some issues. We require them to do weekly journals. And when I asked them if we should get rid of the journals when we bring in new students for this class, they said, no, keep the journals. That was the best part about this class. And that really surprised me. And Amy has some similar feedback from her classes, but they really enjoyed having the chance to kind of talk to their instructor privately about things that were going on in their lives and having the space to process through that. So while it seemed like this class was kind of an extra, it didn't necessarily have the same weight as maybe their Calc 1 class for their major. It gave them that space, especially because they were, you know, not having a lot of social interactions this semester, especially if they were living on campus. They may not have had a support system. So this was at least creating a space for them once a week to have some support and be able to let out those things and ask questions. Does anybody have questions about that pilot? It was very challenging to teach that synchronously for anyone who taught last semester. If you were teaching to the black squares, you know what I'm talking about. Having to teach a first year seminar class to black squares was not my favorite. And I don't know that students got as much out of it as they could have. I don't feel like I got to know them as well as I would if their cameras were on, which of course I wouldn't require of them for various reasons. But the in-classroom experience I think would have been a lot richer. So this coming spring, we are going to offer the GST 100 sections to both first year students who didn't take one in the fall and our incoming students for spring, and they will be in a hybrid format. So they'll meet with their instructor on Tuesday for class, face-to-face, masked, distanced, all of that stuff. And then on Thursday, we'll have an online version of class where we'll bring in guest speakers from different offices around campus so they can get familiar with what resources are available to them. So that way they have some face time with each other and with the instructor and with their success coach. So that's one thing that we're changing up a little bit based on how things went.
I have a question,
Sure.
Mallory. I am Emily Estrada in sociology, a new faculty member here at SUNY Oswego. And so my questions are of clarification, and my apologies if you mentioned these already. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this course correctly. So did you say that this was piloted in the fall? This was not pre-existing prior to this academic year?
So GST 100 has existed for a while.
Okay.
However, it is attached to a residential experience. So
Okay.
we have a first year student building called Johnson Hall on campus.
Okay.
So students who live in Johnson Hall have to take a GST 100 class as part of that experience. So what we did was expand the class part of it for students not living in Johnson Hall.
Okay, great. And then is this a required course for incoming students or is it
It
an
is not.
optional? Okay.
It is optional right now. We do not have a required first year experience course at this time. We do have a program called First Choice, which we're going to talk a little bit about next. We have a lot of first year exclusive sections of classes that we offer, and they are
Okay.
across disciplines. Some of them are required for majors, others are elective courses. So students, we try to give students in their first semester a first choice course in their schedule.
Okay.
So advisors, when they build those schedules, they try to make sure every student has, we call them F sections for first choice. So we try to give every single student one of those F sections. So they have a class where they're with other first years, with a faculty person who is aware of transitional issues. And there are some specific goals for those first year only sections.
That sounds great. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome and welcome. All right. So Lynn, I'm going to let you kind of kick off this part a little
Okay.
bit. If you want
Sure.
to talk about your history class.
Right. So this actually, Emily's question is a really good segue into this because I teach History 100, which is an F section. And the F sections can be in any department. This year, I decided last spring to join the pilot program of coordinating the GST 100 course with my first choice History 100 class. So this was, unfortunately, I think Mallory and I decided to do this well before, the pandemic. So we just had to fly with it and just see what happens. But many departments, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mallory, but many departments have an F section of an introductory class. And it is typically limited to a certain number of students. My History 100 class had only 19 students. 2 eventually disappeared this fall for various reasons, but typically they're small. And we have a number of first choice goals, which of course is built into the course, such as helping them with academic success, helping them adjust to college, helping them get to know various offices and people on campus, building a student community in the classroom, building relationships with each other, building relationship with me, the instructor. So I've been teaching in the first choice program for a number of years. And part of the reason I like doing it is because I like making those connections with first year students. I feel it's really important for them to get to know me individually and to get to know each other individually. So this past fall, one of the primary reasons I have to say that I chose to teach this class as hybrid and not online was because I felt that our first year students really needed to see me in person. And even though I had a mask and we were socially distant and I had to sort of rethink my course in terms of how are we going to split the class up so we can socially distance, so everyone can have a chance to come to class in person. Many people opted to join on Zoom. And as Mallory mentioned, teaching to black boxes is just really, really hard. But it was one of the things I noticed about this particular year in terms of first choice and for this first semester during the pandemic was that a lot of our students struggled with social interaction or the lack thereof. As Mallory mentioned before, not a lot of students had social interaction with each other. And I noticed, and many of you may have noticed this also, if you had first year students, even if they were in the same classroom together, they didn't talk to each other. They were socially distant. And I think that implementation of social distance, while of course was absolutely the right thing to do, and of course is there for our safety, it also meant that they didn't feel comfortable talking with one another, even if they were on opposite ends of the classroom. So that made it really, really challenging. Another issue that came up in this particular class was that in terms of the material that I had to present, I think I cut the material down by about a third of what I normally do in the classroom because there just wasn't enough time because of socially distancing protocols. I had to split my class up into 3 different sections so that each group would come and meet with me once a week in the classroom. And then after we went into lockdown for 2 weeks, where we were on pause for 2 weeks, a lot of students opted to go home. And so they were joining us via Zoom instead of being in the classroom. And even some students who were on campus in the dorms opted to join using Zoom instead of actually coming in person. So that was a real challenge in terms of, and the course is really designed to encourage discussion with students, discussion with me, to encourage them to work in small groups, to encourage them to engage with each other in oral presentations and get to know each other better. And it just, because of the protocols we had to abide by, those kinds of guidelines and those kinds of processes that I wanted to do with them, the kinds of oral presentations and group work and things just didn't work out this semester. So one thing that I did notice that because my first choice class was linked with Mallory's GST 100 class, I would often engage my students in discussions about how that class was going, and we'd always chit chat before class about, what they were learning there. Did they find it useful? And one of the challenges that Amy, Mallory, and I talked about last week when we were getting ready for this session was that indeed what really had to happen was students had to commit to the GST class. That was one of the, it was really there for their benefit. And even though it's only a 1-credit class, it is a 1 credit, right, Mallory? 1
Yeah.
credit. Even though some students, did not necessarily find it useful, some students dropped GST 100. And the students who dropped it, in my opinion, who were in my class, absolutely positively needed it so much in order to just feel connected to their classmates, connected to us as faculty and staff, connected to the school. And dropping that was just a big mistake in my estimation. Another challenge, of course, I noticed for my students in particular was that because they were first-year students, they had a lot of challenges not in terms of using the technology, but being able to keep track of everything. And different courses had different platforms. Some people were using Google Classroom, some were using Blackboard, some had a combination of different platforms. And when I spoke individually to some of my students using Zoom, they said that every day was just really hard for them because it just meant, okay, what class am I doing? What am I on Zoom? Am I in person? Am I using Google Classroom? Am I submitting it here? Am I going there? And keeping track of everything like that was really very challenging for them, which meant even more so they should have stuck with GST and really relied on us more in that regard, which I think would have been good for them. However, one thing I did notice that was a positive, and we can talk more about this at the end, and one of the takeaways that I noticed was very positive, was that the students who really stuck with it, the students who really committed to the class, whether in person or on Zoom, the students who made an effort to contact me and talk to me, who connected with us as faculty and as staff in our courses, I think felt very connected to the school, which I think is really critical for success academically and personally, and also for retention later on. But I think they shared a common experience going through this together, and having other students they could rely on, having me, having Mallory, having Amy, having other people in the first year experience group that they could rely on really, I think, will make them a stronger group going forward. And I'm really curious if we could do a survey. We were talking about surveys before, but I'd be really curious to keep track of this particular first year group as they go through SUNY Oswego as sophomores, as juniors, as seniors, to see if that cohesiveness that some of them managed to develop despite all of the problems they had this semester, if that really made a difference for them, if they feel if they feel somehow different than perhaps other cohorts of students. I'd be really curious to know if going through this situation together has enabled them to form deeper bonds with each other because they've suffered through so much, both personally and academically, and yet still managed to come through. So I don't know if Amy or Mallory want to comment on that, but is there anything else that I need to mention about first choice? I think that's pretty much it. So thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
That was great, Lynn. I'm gonna kind of pipe in and talk about my course, which is pretty similar, but also adds an extra component to it, which Mallory already kind of alluded to a little bit. But my course is a first year signature course, so it's a little bit different than a first choice course. And Emily, this is probably going to confuse you even more because this is like a chunk of I think maybe 10 or 11 courses that really focus on, they have a couple different objectives, but similar, but they're a little bit more like fun. I don't want to say fun course, because that's not to say Lynn's history class isn't fun, but it's a little bit more based on like hobbies and that type of stuff. So anyways, I teach a first year signature course, but what it kind of molded into is similar to the GST 100 course, but it's a 3-credit course. So we're able to dig a little bit deeper into some of the topics. But more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but what makes it different is that because it is 3 credits, I get to see them 3 times a week. And so that was really huge. The one thing that I made a promise to my students was that we would stay face to face. So we stayed face to face with the exception of the 2-week pause that we had. I thought about whether we should go back or not go back after the pause. I had a couple students that did stay home because they had COVID. And so they ended up just staying home. But after giving it some thought, and I have underlying issues, I was just like, you know what? It's a first year course. I need to see them. I think more for my mental health than their mental health. But I really, really appreciated the fact that they were willing to come back to the classroom after the pause as much as I was willing to. And so that worked out well. But the way we ended up doing it was because obviously I was in a classroom with that could only seat, I think, 12, and I had 19 students. And so on Mondays, and this is how it was from day one, it was a hybrid. So on Mondays, I saw them online. The whole entire, I had 19 of them, plus I had 4 coaches, which I'll talk about in a moment. So we were online, but it wasn't like a lecture based. We did mainly group stuff. We were in groups and all that. I got really good with the Zoom groups and all that. But, I was talking to the black boxes. I did tell them if they would even put a picture of themselves or a picture of their dog or a picture of their favorite hobby, something, so that it wasn't just their name, which whatever, it is what it is. So we had that on Mondays, and then on Wednesdays I had half the class, and then on Friday I had the other half. But the cool part of the class was when I did not have them face to face. So Wednesday I had, say, group A face to face. Group B was divided into 2 additional groups with coaches, and so they were online synchronously with their peer coaches doing wellness coaching sessions. And then we flip-flopped it on Friday. So I was teaching the same lesson Wednesday and Friday, but the students got something different each day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so with the group coaching sessions, it was really great. Really what it was is I worked along with my coaches, which this year were juniors and seniors. I know Mallory had some sophomores as well, which is, I think, a great idea. But I worked along with them. And then what happened was the coaches had to come up. I taught them how to do coaching, essentially, how to do motivational interviewing, how to facilitate discussions, that type of stuff. And so I was teaching them that, and then they were practicing it in their coaching sessions that were synchronous while I was doing the face-to-face, and it worked out really well. The coaches had to come up with questions, and the students absolutely loved it because, again, they were able to see me face-to-face, and of course I know that's what they loved, but in reality, I think what they loved was the opportunity to chat each day. They had to meet with the same people each class period, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they built a great rapport with each other. So there's groups of 4 or 5, and with their coaches. And the coaches had like a group me that they used with their own 4 or 5 students, which worked out really great because if you could just picture that first year student, the first time they don't go to submit something on Blackboard and something weird happens, because something always weird happens with Blackboard. They were able to quickly group me a message to their coach, maybe on a Sunday night when I'm not going to respond, and the coaches responded. Not that they had to, but you know how our students are, just as soon as they get a message, they respond. So that helped me out tremendously. But the other cool thing, and Mallory alluded to this already, is the journals. And so one thing that the students loved, besides being with their coaches, is that they had to submit a journal online each week. And the journal was only viewable to myself and their coach. And so they really, really opened up in these journals to a point where I would say the one thing I absolutely hate about being a faculty member is I absolutely despise grading. I just hate grading. But let me tell you, these journals, I was just like so engrossed in. And it's like, you think these kids have superficial problems, but no, they're not superficial at all. They are so deep and they're so intense. And so listening to these stories that they were opening up about were amazing. What was equally amazing was that my coaches had to then go in each week to respond to the journals. But what was so amazing is if you could see how the coaches morphed into these empathetic coaches that really were able to draw out the positives. The class focused on positive psychology and daily goal setting and habit tracking. The coaches were able to kind of reinforce that and really be empathetic and not tell them what to do, but help them find out what they should do based off the questions. And then the third part of the journals that worked really well, or not, it worked well, but it was sad, was I did have probably once a month a coach come up to me and say, so-and-so is really struggling in their journals. I'm noticing, because I wasn't reading the journals every single week. Or I would, read a few here, a few there. And so would, one of my coaches would say, hey, so-and-so is, struggling here. I don't know if I can help them. And so I was able to reach out to the student and set up individual meetings, and we chatted and found out what was wrong. And if I felt that it had to go further, maybe I think I did send one or two actually to the counseling center. Some of them were just, I sent them to some of the advisement center workshops, about time management or something. But it was like a nice triage that we had kind of set up. And I think what worked nicely is I knew the coaches really well. And so they had a really good rapport with me and felt comfortable saying, hey, so-and-so is struggling. But in reality, I would say the biggest bonus to my course is the use of the coaches. And what I would love to see down the road is us to have like some sort of health coaching facility. I don't want to say call it a facility, but space where we have drop-in coaching hours, or we have structured coaching hours that can be part of some of the first year courses, or even further on, not just first year, but even further on, because the students really do appreciate the peer-to-peer coaching. And I have a ton of research to show the number of schools that are doing this peer-to-peer coaching, and not just peer-to-peer, but they're also using like graduate students that are maybe in the counseling center, counseling programs or something like that, that would serve as the coaches as well. But just a place for them to vent, not anything to treat any sort of, mental health issues. Again, that would be sent right to to Kate and her group. But just to talk about, hey, I am lacking some social interaction, or I am, struggling with motivation because I never leave my room, that type of stuff. So yeah, I mean, that was basically my experience with my course. The coaching really played probably the biggest role, the coaching and the journaling, and actually seeing them 3 times a week.
And we did borrow Amy's coaching model from her signature course for the GST 100 pilot. So along with that GST 100 pilot, First Year Experience launched a success coaching program. So all of the success coaches took an HSC 395 class, which is a wellness coaching practicum. It's the same class that Amy's coaches take. So they learned all about motivational interviewing, positive psychology. One of Amy's faculty, Jessica Harris, came in and did a QPR training to teach them about suicide prevention and how to have difficult conversations. We brought Dr. Rodman King in to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. We talked a lot about COVID and resources on campus. So these success coaches were really learning about wellness coaching and how to implement that with their first year students. And they were embedded in those GST 100 sections as well. So like Amy said, I would really love to see that expanded in some way. We have to do kind of a resource audit to see what's possible. I know Amy has like a folder of grant opportunities and studies that we'll have to pick through. But the success coaches, I think, got a really great experience learning about how to relate wellness coaching to their intended professions, because the 8 dimensions of wellness cover a lot of things. So we had finance majors who were really jazzed about working with students on budgeting and their financial wellness and things like that. And we had students who were education majors who were really excited to work with them on some academic study strategies and ways to do better in their classes. So we were able to relate the coaching experience to students who were serving in that role so they could make it applicable to their career goals. But then our first year students also had that connection where they could meet with a success coach instead of their instructor. If they weren't comfortable, they could ask questions. They set up group me's and Snapchat groups and things that I was not in. So they didn't have that authority hovering over them, so they could freely talk about some things. And also in GST 100, they were required to meet with their coaches a certain amount of times throughout the semester. Doing it again in a future semester, I would make that assignment earlier in the semester to set up those meetings, because that's when students really started to open up, when they had those one-on-one meetings. So that would be my takeaway from that.
I did the one-on-one meetings also, but I did them myself. Looking back, I did do them early and it did help open things up. But I think doing it with the success coaches would have been, like, I'm almost wondering if they sat in with me. It was too time consuming for me, for one, but doing that earlier, if you have the choice, I think is huge, because it really does create those lines of communication pretty quickly.
Yeah, we did in GST 100, we did an assignment. I called it the quad. So they had to meet with their instructor as an assignment. They had to meet with their success coach as an assignment. They had to meet with their academic advisor, which they have to do to get their PIN anyway. So that was a freebie. And then they had their choice of like a campus expert that they could meet with, or an alumnus. So it could be a career coach, it could be a counselor, it could be a wellness coach, their RA, it could be whoever, but someone from campus to help them go outside and make other connections. So we kind of made that mandatory to try to get them out of their bubble a little bit.
And I met with my students as part of the first choice curriculum. They're required to meet with me. And in a normal year, I would have lunch with them in the dining halls, or I'd meet them on campus somewhere, or they'd come to my office. But this year I had Zoom meetings with each student individually, where I did ask them to turn on their video so I could see them. And I did that towards the middle of the semester, but I agree doing it early in the semester and then maybe having a follow-up later in the semester with each student. It would be a really great idea, because I think what we're all talking about is creating a web of support so that we're all aware of what we can do and where our students are. And I know on a couple of occasions, Mallory and I exchanged emails about particular students and concerns we were having with particular students. And that was a great support to me to know that, that there was someone else I could go to sort of double check on somebody. Because unlike, in a person-to-person, a face-to-face class where you can actually try to connect with the student immediately before they leave the classroom. If you keep trying on, email, sometimes they don't respond. A lot of times they don't respond. And I have to say a couple students never did, in fact, meet with me individually, even though I, begged them like 5 times to do so. So it's good to have that web of support, I think, for students to know that there's always somebody that they can go to. So
I agree, Lynn. I had a few that I never was able to connect with either. And ironically, they were the 2 that dropped out. Like one actually left college. One, I don't even know if she actually officially dropped out of the class, but she literally dropped off the face of the earth. But I just wanted to address, Emily, what you had asked in the chat box here. It is a little confusing. So my coaches so not all first year signature courses have coaches. In fact, I think up until this year, I was the only one that's ever used them, mainly because it was, I'm in the Department of Health Promotion and Wellness. And so we focus on prevention, health promotion, health, wellness prevention and such. And so we had been training our upper division students to be health coaches. So this was really a way for me to implement them to get some firsthand experience. And then Mallory and I started chatting. Actually, I should say Mallory approached me about the 395, and Mallory kind of brought it to the next level and really made it a little bit more just better, really. I don't know what word to use, but it just ended up being, I guess, more structure. My personality, the structure doesn't work well. So, and then as far as how I identified them, it's, back to the COVID specific, again, I've used coaches for a couple years, so it wasn't COVID specific, but it did work out well this year. And same with Mallory. I don't think, well, I know hers were not going to be implemented just because of COVID. It just so happened that it happened at the same time. But as far as identifying them, I would say that Mallory, I think, did the best, where she actually put out like a general application, actually, that I stole. But Mallory really reached out to areas all over campus about any good people or any good students that would be great coaches. So.
And these are our first year success coaches. They were a very lovely group of students. They were a bright spot in my week, I will say. We met every Monday for their HSC 395 class, and they actually turned their cameras on. So it was like, oh, it was such a welcome change from the black boxes. So I think they got a really great experience out of it. And of course it was frustrating because they were dealing with the same things we were, the black boxes and no responses to communication, and trying to get them engaged with very limited means to do so. And we did a lot of discussion about how it's not you. This is just a COVID thing where we're all struggling to connect and we're all struggling to engage. And we're really like throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to see what sticks, because none of us have been through this before. I will say that the cool thing about the journals and having the coaches was that for GST 100, I could get kind of a pulse of when students needed wellness breaks. I know a lot of students expressed their concern about not having their fall break in the semester, and that really wore on them. So if journals were leaning really negatively that week, I would sprinkle in some breaks for them or give them like some kind of activity they could go do on their own so they could have that space to work on other things, or, spend some time on an area of wellness that they stated in their journal that they needed to focus on. So that was really positive about the whole coaching experience and journaling, and giving them space to reflect on that. I do want to make sure we have some time for discussion. So I'm going to whiz through just some positive numbers. Really first year experience. Debbie Furlong touched on this in her session before this, but we're very centered on student sense of belonging, whether it's academic belonging. Do I feel like my major is the right fit for me? Do I have opportunities within my major that will make me successful? Can I connect socially? Do I have friends? Do my faculty care about me? All of those types of things go into student sense of belonging. So we wanted to try to measure that. And this is a different study than the ones that Debbie Furlong put into the field this semester. They're not specifically COVID related, and these are very raw numbers, but they were more positive than I thought they would be. What we ended up doing was we took a subset of the NESE questions that talk about students' experiences on campus. And our campus does the NESE every 3 years in the spring. So what we did, we got approved to use a subset of questions from this survey that relate to student sense of belonging. And we only deployed this to our first year students from the fall. And here's some of the preliminary data that we found. We still need to tabulate the demographic data that's connected to this, but I did want to share these initial results with you. So for 491 students out of about 1,200 responded, which I thought was pretty significant. And it's a little blurry on this now that I'm looking at it, but about 85% of students said that they're definitely going to come back. We have about 13% in the maybe range. So those are students that can still be convinced, which I think is good. If we can show them things that we're willing to change and supports that will be there for them, and if we're willing to have those discussions, which I know we are, they can be swayed in one direction or the other. And some of this is COVID related, the maybes, right? So if they have responsibilities at home, they may be weighing out their decision. Is it better for me to take classes online? Should I go to a community college and wait it out? It's very complex. And then, you know, less than 3% said they're definitely not coming back. So I thought that number was lower than I expected it to be. If they could start all over again, would they still come to Oswego? Most said either probably yes or definitely yes. I would like to see more definitely yes, but like Debbie Furlong was talking about before, they don't know what they were missing. I don't think they thought their experience was terrible, but they don't yet know how good it could be. So I'm curious to see what that number would look like in their sophomore year if, you know, we can go back to some semblance of normal. So I'm looking to follow these students and see how this needle changes a little bit. And then this I thought was pretty positive. Our NESE data on academic advising is typically pretty strong, and that's consistent here. Actually, that's the next slide, sorry. So students generally feel comfortable at our institution, they feel valued, and they feel like they're part of a community. Some feel more strongly about it than others, but generally they feel like Oswego is a good place for them to be. Their interactions with students, this one's tough because some of them didn't really have a ton of interactions with other students. But again, the poor numbers are a lot lower than I thought they would be. So they are having some significant interactions with their peers. Again, they don't know any differently what it should look like other than what they've seen in movies or heard from their siblings, but the reports here weren't as terrible as I thought they would be. So here's the part about academic advisors. You'll see our first year advisors are doing a really great job, and I think that's awesome. So a lot of good reports about academic advising and also our faculty. This isn't surprising to me. I think the first year faculty I work with are really caring and supportive folks who teach first year sections for a reason. They have that nurturing quality where they really want to help them transition to this new place our advisors too. So I think we're really fortunate at Oswego that we have these folks who are committed to the whole student and what their experience is going to look like. So I just wanted to share some of that initial data with you. Once I have the demographic information connected to all of it, and I can get Debbie Furlong's brain wrapped around it with me, I will definitely be sharing that information out as an update. So those are three main priorities that we were focused on in fall 2020. So the GST 100 pilot, first choice sections, whether they were online or in person, and then implementing some coaching programs to help our first year students. So I know we have some first year supporters in here. So if there's questions you have or strategies you use, we'll use this time to share those. Amy, Lynn, you have anything else you want
I
to
think
add?
Carolina had a comment.
Oh.
Carolina?
Yes, I have actually a question because you all work with freshman students. I would like to know if you notice any new trends besides COVID situation. Are there any new trends for this generation of students comparing to, let's say, students who finished 5 years ago or students who are still, finishing this year? Is it something regarding the support they need, how independent they are, how much encouragement they need, what their vulnerability to getting something immediately instantaneous. This may be determined by the phones and the computer access, etc. So could you reflect a little bit on that, please? It will be helpful for me while working with them. And I'm always thinking, how is this new generation? How is it? And I try to learn also from, people of this age. And it's really helpful to understand with whom you are talking to and how to impact them.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I will say that this incoming generation, they are not as good with technology as you think they are. So really,
in that.
yeah, so they may be on their phones all the time, but it doesn't mean that they're familiar with the technology that we're using on campus. So my recommendation, something I found useful, was really taking that first week to help walk them through Blackboard, help walk them through our systems, reiterate the importance of them checking their Oswego email address. How do you write an email to a professor in an appropriate way? Things that we take for granted that we think everyone knows, they don't. Showing them how to use a Dropbox in Blackboard, how the exams are going to work if you're doing online exams, if you're using clicker technology in your classes. I do also moonlight in the communication department, and I teach a first choice class there. We did a lot of groundwork with Zoom and how it works, how to share a screen. And we framed it as, this is the new reality for the workplace. When you get into business, you may have to do this too. You may have to present online. You may have to use tools like this. You'll need to use collaborative software. So showing them how to use Google Docs, Google Drive, Google Sheets, how to share their screens and work collaboratively in these spaces. We think they know how to do it. Not all of them do.
Thank you. That's really useful. Thank you.
Any other tips from our other first year instructors? I know we've got a lot of you in here.
I would also say we're seeing, at least I've noticed anecdotally, an increase of students who are really struggling, I think, in various ways, whether with learning disabilities or with anxiety issues or with stresses at home. And I'm really very grateful that we have our own, first year experience team to help these students, because I think I think COVID has just exacerbated, students' concerns and issues and anxieties already. And that this semester made me realize even more so that a lot of them were struggling. I mean, and I had one student who just stayed after
We're
class.
going to have to end
Okay.
so we can get the video rendered and begin the next session.
Okay. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory.
Thank
Thank you, everybody. If you have
Thank you.
questions, feel free to email me.
The session will be reopened in just a few seconds.